1 week. That is all it took. Just 7 days ago, the world watched President Trump and the Iranian president put their names on a piece of paper that was supposed to end one of the most dangerous wars of our lifetime. Cameras flashed, leaders shook hands, and we were told the worst was finally behind us. And now this morning, American warplanes have struck Iran once again. Iran says it has hit back at United States forces across the Gulf. And the tiny island nation of Bahrain has woken up to the sound of drones overhead. The ink on that peace deal is barely dry, and already the bombs are falling. So what on earth just happened? And how did we get from a signed agreement to fresh airstrikes in a matter of days? Stay with me, because over the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through every single piece of this story calmly, clearly, and with the facts as they stand right now. Welcome back to Nation Alert, the channel where we cut through the noise and bring you the news that actually matters, explained in plain language. If this is your first time here, a very warm welcome. My job is simple. I take the biggest, most confusing stories of the day and I lay them out for you step by step so you can understand not just what happened, but why it matters and what might come next. There is a lot to get through today, and the situation is moving by the hour. So before we dive in, do me one quick favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because when a story like this is changing this fast, you want to be the first to know when there is an update. Right, let us get into it. To understand why today feels like such a shock, we have to rewind just 1 week. After months of brutal fighting, a war that began back in late February, the United States and Iran finally agreed to a memorandum of understanding. Now, that is a formal name, but think of it simply as a written promise. Both sides put their signatures on it. President Trump signed it while he was in France for the G7 summit, and the Iranian president signed it too, with Pakistan acting as the go-between that helped get the two sides to the table. The whole point of this agreement was to create a 60-day window, a breathing space. 60 days in which the guns would fall silent and the diplomats would try to hammer out a much bigger and more permanent peace deal. At the heart of it all sat one stretch of water that you have probably heard mentioned again and again, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow channel is one of the most important shipping lanes on the entire planet. Before this war, roughly 1/5 of all the oil and gas the world uses pass through it every single day. When that waterway is open, fuel flows and prices stay steady. When it is blocked, the whole global economy feels the squeeze at the petrol pump and in the shops. So the deal promised to reopen the strait, to let ships move freely again, and in return, Iran agreed that it would not build or chase after nuclear weapons. On paper, it looked like the beginning of the end. For a brief moment, there was genuine hope. But here is the uncomfortable truth, and it is something I want to be honest with you about. That hope was always sitting on shaky ground. Even as the deal was being celebrated, the two sides could not actually agree on what some of the most basic parts of it meant. Take the strait itself. The United States, along with its allies in the Gulf, sees the Strait of Hormuz as an international waterway, a channel that belongs to the world and through which any ship should be free to pass. Iran sees it very differently. Iran insists that the rules of passage through that water are its business to control, and it has been warning that ships must follow the exact routes that Tehran lays out, and that it may even start charging fees for the right to pass through. So you had two countries who had just signed the same piece of paper, yet each was reading it in a completely different way. There was also the question of money. As part of any wider deal, billions of dollars of frozen Iranian money could eventually be released. But the two sides did not see eye to eye on how that money would be spent. When you build a ceasefire on top of disagreements this deep, it does not take much to bring the whole thing crashing down. And this week, that is exactly what we saw. So how did the fighting start up again? It began with a single ship. On Thursday, a cargo vessel was making its way through the Strait of Hormuz. This was a Singapore-flagged ship called the Ever Lovely, a commercial carrier, not a warship, exiting the strait along the coast of Oman. Now, according to the United States, Iran was furious that ships were using a route outside the specific path that Tehran had marked out in its own waters. Iran's Revolutionary Guard had issued warnings telling vessels to stay strictly on the approved route. And then, hours later, the situation turned violent. President Trump said that Iran fired at least 4 one-way attack drones at ships moving through the strait. One of those drones struck the upper deck of that large and very expensive cargo ship. The good news, and it is important to hold on to this, is that nobody on board was hurt. The ship took some damage, but it stayed in one piece and was able to carry on its journey. The United States said it managed to knock down the 3 other drones before they could do any harm. But the message had been sent. A commercial ship going about its ordinary business had been attacked in one of the busiest waterways on Earth just days after a peace deal promised exactly the opposite. President Trump did not hold back. Writing on his social media platform, he described the attack as a foolish violation of the ceasefire agreement. Those were his words, a foolish violation. He laid out what had happened, the 4 drones, the strike on the cargo ship, the 3 that were brought down, and he made it very clear that he was not going to let it slide. When reporters at the White House pressed him on whether Iran would face consequences, his answer was short and sharp. "You will find out," he told them. And when they pushed again, asking whether the United States would respond, he repeated it. "We are going to respond. You are going to find out." Now, if you have followed this president for any length of time, you will know that this is the kind of language that usually comes right before action. He did not threaten endlessly. He did not draw it out. He simply said, "Wait and see," and we did not have to wait very long at all. On Friday, the United States military carried out its response, and it was significant. American forces struck targets inside Iran. According to United States Central Command, the body that runs American military operations in that part of the world, the strikes hit Iranian missile and drone storage sites, the very places where the weapons used in these kinds of attacks are kept, along with coastal radar sites that Iran uses to track ships and aircraft. Central Command called it a powerful response to Iran's dangerous behavior and said that this behavior had undermined the freedom of ships to move safely through a vital trade route. And here is the detail that makes this so serious. These were the first American strikes on Iran since the 2 countries agreed to extend their already fragile ceasefire just last week. Think about that for a moment. A deal designed to stop the bombing led, within 7 days, to fresh bombing. The military made a point of saying that its forces remain present and watchful across the region, and that they are there to make sure every part of the agreement with Iran is respected. In other words, the United States was signaling that it intends to enforce this deal by force, if it has to. Of course, in a conflict like this, very few blows go unanswered. On Saturday morning, Iran said it had struck back. Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced that it had targeted what it called United States forces in the region in response to the American strikes. Iran's foreign ministry went further, accusing the United States of breaking both international law and the ceasefire agreement itself. From Iran's point of view, it was America that had broken the promise, not Tehran. And this is one of the hardest things about following a story like this. Both sides are pointing at the other and saying, "You broke it first." Iran says it was simply defending its own coast and its own waters. The United States says it was responding to an unprovoked attack on a peaceful cargo ship. Both cannot be fully right, and yet both are absolutely convinced that they are. Iran did not name the exact places it had hit, but it did not take long for the world to see where some of those drones had ended up. That brings us to one of the most worrying developments of all, and it involves a country that many viewers may not think about very often, the small island kingdom of Bahrain. Bahrain sits in the Gulf, and crucially, it is home to a major United States naval base. It hosts the American Fifth Fleet, which is a huge part of how America keeps watch over these waters. On Saturday, Bahrain's foreign ministry said that a number of Iranian drones had targeted the country. Bahrain called it a flagrant threat to the safety of its citizens and the people living there, and described it as a violation of its sovereignty, which simply means its right to be safe and in control within its own borders. The Revolutionary Guard, for its part, said it had hit locations belonging to what it called the American forces in the region, though it did not specifically name Bahrain in that claim. This matters enormously because when a conflict starts spilling over into other countries, countries that are home to American bases and to hundreds of thousands of ordinary civilians, the risk of the whole thing widening grows by the hour. A war between two nations is dangerous enough. A war that starts dragging in its neighbors is how regional conflicts turn into something far larger. And Bahrain is not the only place feeling the pressure. The Gulf states, the cluster of nations that share these waters, have been watching this crisis with mounting alarm. Many of them have already condemned the recent attacks, and they have made clear that they stand with Bahrain. One neighboring country said plainly that it stands alongside Bahrain against anything that threatens its security. There was even a moment of fear in Dubai earlier in this crisis, when residents received an emergency alert about an incoming missile on their phones, only to be told minutes later to ignore it because it had been a false alarm. Imagine that for a second. Imagine going about your day and your phone buzzes with a warning that a missile is heading your way, and then just as your heart drops, a second message tells you never mind. That is the level of tension ordinary people in this region are living with right now. This is not happening in some faraway, empty desert. It is happening around cities, ports, and homes where millions of people are simply trying to get on with their lives. Now, you might be watching this and thinking, this is all happening thousands of miles away. Why should it affect me? And that is a completely fair question. The answer comes back to that narrow strip of water, the Strait of Hormuz. Because so much of the world's oil and gas passes through it, anything that disrupts it sends ripples right across the global economy. When ships cannot move safely, fuel becomes harder to get. And when fuel becomes harder to get, the price goes up. We have already seen during this war how petrol prices climbed and how the cost of everyday goods felt the strain. The people who work on these ships are caught right in the middle of it, too. A maritime organization that watches over this region said that in just a few days, more than 100 vessels had been evacuated from the area, representing thousands of seafarers, ordinary men and women doing a tough job who had to be moved to safety. The shipping industry even had to pause some of its evacuation work after the latest attack. So when you fill up your car, or when you notice the price of your weekly shop creeping up, remember that events in a faraway strait can reach all the way into your own household budget. This story is closer to home than it might first appear. So where does this leave the peace process? This is the part that I find genuinely difficult to read. On one hand, the talks have not officially collapsed. The vice president, who has been given a leading role in these negotiations, struck a firm tone. He said that Iran had signed a ceasefire agreement and that America had honored it. He added that if Iran has any disagreements about how the deal is being applied, it can simply pick up the phone and talk. But then came the warning, and it was blunt. Violence, he said, will be met with violence. On the other hand, Iran is pointing to a specific part of the agreement, a clause that it says puts control of passage through the strait firmly in its own hands. So you have America saying, we honored the deal, and we will hit back if you attack. And Iran saying, you are the ones breaking the deal, and we have every right to control these waters. They are reading the same document and reaching opposite conclusions. And as of right now, the president has not publicly reacted to Iran's strikes on Saturday. That silence is its own kind of suspense. The world is waiting to see what comes next, and nobody can say for certain which way this will turn. There is one more piece to this puzzle that you should know about, because it shows just how tangled this whole situation has become. On Friday, the United States Secretary of State announced the framework of a separate deal, this one between Lebanon and Israel. On the surface, that sounds like good news, another step towards calming the wider region. But there is a catch. The powerful armed group in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which has rejected similar deals in the past, was not part of these negotiations. So a peace framework was announced, but one of the most important players on the ground was not even at the table. And that tells you a great deal about how fragile all of this really is. Deals are being signed and announced, but the question that keeps coming back again and again is whether the people who actually have to follow them are willing to do so. A signature on a document is one thing. Peace on the ground is something else entirely. If you have been following this conflict for a while, you may have noticed a pattern, and it is a painful one. A ceasefire is announced. there is hope. Then an incident happens, a ship is hit, a drone is fired, a strike is launched, and the fighting flares up all over again. We have seen this cycle repeat more than once during this war. Earlier agreements were violated by both sides, sometimes within days, and each time the same questions return. Can a deal hold when the two sides do not even agree on what it says? Can peace survive when there is so little trust between the people signing the papers? This latest flare-up, coming just 1 week after the most significant agreement yet, is a stark reminder that ending a war is far harder than starting one. A handshake and a signature can happen in an afternoon. Real, lasting peace takes patience, trust, and a willingness on both sides to hold their fire even when they feel provoked. And that, so far, has been the missing ingredient. So what should we all be keeping an eye on in the coming hours and days? First, watch for any public response from President Trump to Iran's Saturday strikes, because his reaction will tell us a lot about whether America plans to escalate further or hold steady. Second, watch the Strait of Hormuz itself. If ships start moving freely again, that is a sign things may be calming. If the attacks on vessels continue, that is a warning that the situation is getting worse. Third, watch the Gulf states, especially Bahrain. If more of these countries get drawn directly into the fighting, the conflict could widen quickly. And finally, watch whether those 60 days of negotiations actually continue, or whether this latest exchange of fire blows the whole process apart. These are the signals that will tell us where this is heading, and I will be right here following every one of them to keep you informed. Let us take a breath and pull it all together, because there has been a lot to absorb. 1 week ago, the United States and Iran signed an agreement meant to end their war and reopen a vital shipping route. This week, that agreement began to unravel. It started when Iran struck a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday. President Trump called it a foolish violation. On Friday, America responded with strikes on Iranian missile sites, drone storage, and radar. On Saturday, Iran hit back at what it called American forces in the region, and drones struck Bahrain, home to a major United States naval base. The peace talks have not officially ended, but the trust they depend on is wearing dangerously thin. And the world, once again, is left holding its breath. Now, I want to hear from you, because this channel has always been about a conversation, not just a broadcast. So let me leave you with a few questions, and I would genuinely love to read your thoughts down in the comments below. First, do you believe this ceasefire can actually survive the next 60 days, or do you think it is already finished? Second, who do you hold responsible for this latest flare-up? The side that fired on the ship, or the side that struck back? Third, do you think the United States was right to respond with force so quickly, or should it have held off and given diplomacy more time? And finally, looking at the bigger picture, do you believe real peace between these two nations is even possible, or are we destined to keep watching this same painful cycle repeat? Drop your answers below. I read as many of your comments as I can, and the discussions you have with each other are honestly one of the best parts of this whole channel. That is where we stand for now, but remember, a story like this can change in an instant. So if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a like, because it genuinely helps the channel reach more people who want clear, honest news. Make sure you are subscribed and that your notification bell is switched on, so you do not miss the moment this story takes its next turn. And if you know someone who has been confused about what is happening between the United States and Iran, share this video with them. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone understand the world a little better. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you in the next one, right here on Nation Alert.